This is an admission of sin. 17 years ago, when I was very young, I held a man's head beneath a river's icy surface, long enough to drown him. That man was my father. I never had a chance to ask my father about his crimes. When I had the bravery to ask him all the questions that boiled within me, the chance to hear his excuses and his lies, it was too late. The bubbles had long stopped rising to the surface. Why? Was all I could say in that moment. I'm glad he couldn't answer, because I don't think anything he would have said would have been good enough. At least not for me. I returned home. I remember that the light was different, with amber streaks darting down from the mountains, like the gates of Valhalla had opened to welcome the ghost of my father. I did not look up. I was afraid of being judged by angels. The house was made entirely of wood and thatch, even though people much poorer than us had renovated their properties to be made of brick or stone decades ago. Although I never looked for proof, and certainly never found any, I was certain that our money went on my father's vices. Whores, gambling, drink. Who knows? I'm sure somebody did, but I never asked anyone in town, nor did they often meet my eye. When I opened the charred piece of wood that barely constituted a door, Emile was washing the dishes. She wore her singular pink dress, the one she had on almost every day since she had started to become a woman at 14. Some days it was pink, some days it was thick grey with the sludge from the river, or brown dirt. I would predict my future, gauging it on that dress. Was today going to be a good day, or a bad day? Today, the dress was a radiant pink. Even our grim little kitchen seemed to sparkle. The amber spotlight that burst through the heavens stormed through the windows, illuminating the dining table. It was one of the only things that survived the fire with any grace. None of us did, that was for sure. 3 places were laid out on the table. My father's plate was significantly bigger than ours. He needed to keep his strength up, or so he used to chant. No matter how much he ate, he was still weak. Strength came from a different place than the stomach. The meals I ate weren't proper or wholesome, but I'd still found the strength to silence the greedy bastard forever. Emile turned around, and I noticed that she had somehow styled her hair. The blonde seemed to curl over, like tiny rolls of butter. She wasn't like me. She always tried to make us a normal family. I never asked whether she tried for my sake, or for his. Her eyes scanned me. They were as white as crystal. My trousers were ripped at the knees, and I had red blotches and bruises from how I had pushed my body down onto the nettles and rocks on the riverbank. I also had several scratches on my arms and cheeks. That was about all he was able to do to me before he accepted his fate. She had seen me in a mess before, but usually with a single black eye. "Brother?" she said. She held her arms before her, her hands clasped gently together. This always looked to me like 2 things, either begging or praying. I knew my dear sister, and in those dark times, she did both aplenty, always ready to serve Father or God. Emile was so inquisitive. Something I liked about her. "Father is dead," I said. "I killed him." She sat down without fuss, her hand still clenched and hanging a little off the tablecloth. I couldn't read her face. She always looked that scared. "Oh." I sat down in the seat at the end, the one that Mother had sat in before the fire. We were both silent for a long time. Since then, I have gleaned a little about what being normal is, and what it feels like. That moment was far from normal. I heard her blubbering in her seat. Usually I was my sister's staunch protector, but the anger that flared in my gut was instant and hot. "Why are you crying? You should be pleased about this." "Are you saying this makes you happy?" she said. Her slender arms were shaking like tree branches. In fact, her entire frame seemed wilted. In the glow of that evening, her tears looked like sap. "No. But then again, I can't tell anymore." She sniffed loudly. Getting up from the table with careful movements, she wandered past me as if in a daze, and clopped up the stairs into the darkness of our room. I heard the creak of the door. The kitchen was now completely silent, and for a while, even the wind from the mountains, which was usually so forceful, fell dead. I felt truly alone. I arranged the items on the table half-heartedly. I brushed dust off the things within my arm's reach. I kept on yawning, as if the whole facade was a bore, and that I had much more interesting things to do with my time than pretend to feel sorry for my dead father. I sat there until long after dusk had fallen. The night sounds were creeping in as always, the hoots of the barn owls and the unknown scratches of dozens of rodents. In my solitude, I could finally pick apart each noise, each little character of the darkness. Usually, the only noise I would listen to was the sound of Emil's breathing and the crunch of my father's feet on the hearth below. My prayer was always the same. Let her have a quiet night tonight. Let her lay undisturbed tonight. Most nights, my prayer was answered. Most nights. It was pitch black when Emil returned. She was wearing her pale nightgown. I used to joke that it made her look like a phantom, and I didn't joke that night. She looked like the ghost of her mother. I had already lit a candle, so I could just make her out. I lit another one on the other side of the table. It was absolutely freezing. However, I felt something else than the bitter air. Freedom. The sensation only lasted for that one night, maybe the next morning as well, but I can still recall it if I search hard enough. I was free to be freezing in our little hovel with my sister. I was, in the cold and the dark, completely safe. I'm famished, she said. We went over into the small pantry that rested under the stairs. I took several slices of ham for us both, some grapes and some cheese, and put them on our normal plates. I looked at his grand oval plate for a second and considered throwing it out the door, but it didn't feel right to waste a good plate, so I stored it away and returned to my meal. Me and Emil ate by candlelight. We could barely see our plates, let alone one another. Our faces danced spectrally across the table. You know, I said, as if we were playing a game, we can sit where we want now. This table is ours. She nodded, her mouth filled to the brim with cheese. I moved my meal in front of his seat. She moved hers to our mother's seat and delicately placed herself as if not to offend. We ate in silence, the strangest meal I'd ever eaten, but the only one that I'd ever felt natural. I cut myself a portion of good crusty bread and was chewing it contentedly when she broke the quiet with, "How did you kill him?" I put the bread down on my plate. He was retching up some of last night's drink upon the bank. I pushed him under, and I held him there. "Why did you kill him?" she asked. I was shocked. She, of all people, should have wanted father dead. Surely it wasn't just me who had dreamt of killing him every night. "Why would you even ask something like that?" I said. "Because it's important." "Isn't it obvious?" "Yes, but I want to hear you say it." I took a deep breath. I killed him for a million reasons. He didn't help Mother. He didn't even try. He just watched this place burn to the ground. We could hear her screaming, and he did nothing. I gaped at her, full of indignation. She didn't deserve to die in a fire, Emil, no matter how many bedtime stories she missed. He was a monster. She was just cold. He had made her that way. Emil took a plump grape and burst it in her mouth. Her gaze was locked on the stem between her fingers. "What else?" "He beat us." "Yes, he did. And starved us, and made us fend for ourselves. He disgusted me." She looked dreadful in the candlelight. Our eyes met for the briefest second, and I knew what she wanted me to say, what I had never said before. "And he made you do things. Unforgivable things." She twirled the stem with her thumb and forefinger. Her eyes seemed to shake, like her arms. "He made you." I could hear it. I wanted to come in and hit him, and tell him he was a demon, and that you were his daughter, but I didn't, because I was afraid he would kill me in the same way that he killed the pigs. I thought... She stopped for a second and lowered her head. I could only see her blonde crown and her pink silhouette. "I thought that you didn't notice." I faltered with my mouth open and lowered my head too. For the first time since I'd killed my father, I felt ashamed. Of course I did. How could I not? The owls hooted their chorus. The mice scratched at the walls. "Sometimes," she said, "I made noises. I made noises like Mother did. It hurt a lot and he smelt of ale, but I tried. I tried to make him happy. Can you imagine that?" I held my head in my hands. I didn't want to hear anymore. I went to apologise, but stopped myself. I wasn't going to apologise for his sins. "He can do that himself in hell," I said. And as far as I know, Emil didn't hear me. She had plucked another grape from the cluster and was letting it burst between her teeth. It was a grey morning the next day, somewhere between 6 and 7 when we left the hovel. I hadn't checked my father's timepiece, I could just tell from the light. On a normal day, I began chopping at this time and kept going until evening, or until my father had said that we had had enough to sell. I sat on the bank, a few places away from where I'd held him down. Emile perched on a glistening rock a few paces away. Somehow, in the space between the previous night and this morning, her dress had become grey with soot and dust. I pushed him into the current right here, I said, sweeping my hand across to show the path of my struggle. I see, said Emile. You'd never be able to tell. And then, I just walked outwards a little, and I let the rapids take him. I didn't really see where he went from there. He could get snagged on a rock or something, or just float in the waterfall pool on the edge of town. Possibly. But he drowned. He was drunk, and he drowned. She seemed satisfied. We left the river. It served its purpose. I suppose. I'd better help you chop the wood then, she said. Why? Because with or without him, someone has to. She patted me on the shoulder. Or we really will starve. I nodded and trundled back towards the hovel with her. The elation I'd felt still remained in some fashion. Every action seemed defined. Every word seemed important. It was like I hadn't seen my sister in years. We had a lot of catching up to do. You know, you're alright, what you said last night. What's that? I replied. I am pleased he's gone, but the thought leaves me numb, as if I have to accept that you're a demon too. Although she said it formally, as if it wasn't really important to her at all, I knew what she was talking about. I had to remain myself and not become a killer. I'm a murderer, Emile, but also like a freedom fighter, like in the stories. So you'd call yourself a hero? I saved you, I said, and then felt like an imbecile for saying it. That's all she said, and then pushed on through the wilderness. For the rest of that day, she helped me chop wood. I usually found it a back-breaking task, but on this day, my pain was eased. Emile struggled while I teased her. Her axe head struck the top of a small column of wood, indenting an inch in. Are you trying to chop that wood or caress it? I said, the same way I would when chopping with the local boys. And again, it was like I was swallowing tar. Now, in the grey light of day, all our jokes seemed foolish and always too close to home. She stared at the wood with loathing, and then brought the axe hard for its middle, splitting it with such a force that a piece rebounded off a nearby tree. I remained quiet until we'd finished. Our childhoods had been ripped right out of us, and nothing could return them. Later that night, I awoke from a brief but deep sleep. I stared out the tiny window above my cot, and saw that the moon was still high in the sky. Rolling over, I saw Emile shuddering to herself on the bunk. It seemed for a second that she was scratching herself, but then her movements ceased completely. She must have heard me roll over. Was she afraid of me as well? Emile? I ventured in the tiniest voice I could. Yes, she replied. Do you feel like a woman now? Her face seemed to sag, not in a sad way, but in a weary way, as if the feelings were just all too much for her, and she now needed to retreat into herself again, if only maybe for a short while. No. I still feel like a girl, stuck between a childhood that didn't exist and a womanhood that won't ever come. The room seemed a little darker. What do you mean? I asked. Emile's hands held her shoulders, and her nails ran the length of her body as if she was resisting the urge to scratch. Nothing, ignore me. I tried, but I couldn't. Outside, the owls sang their night chorus. What made you snap? She said. You could have done it at any time. You could have. Really? I don't know, it just seemed time. She was motionless for a couple of brief moments, and then she seemed to accept this answer, and turned over. Watching the obsidian jewel in the sky, I bit my lip. I'd killed my father right there on that bank, as he had retched his previous night's dinner and drink into his beard and onto his hands, because he had finally looked the way that he'd always looked in my head, a miserable, filthy creature who was devoid of any humanity. For the first time, he wasn't the object of my hate and my woe. He was hate and woe incarnate. It was my duty to kill him and to remove his blight from the earth. It wasn't wrong. It was liberation. I wanted to crawl across the hovel floor and find my sister. I wanted to prove to her that I could never be him, that I was better than them both, and that if she wanted to, she didn't have to wear that dress anymore. But instead, I held my breath and lay as still as I could. Emile was scratching her arms, her legs, her entire body. I bit my lip, hard, until I tasted the blood spreading over my tongue.